A passenger slammed his luggage into a young black teen's seat. Seconds later, his father grabbed the same handle, and what happened next will leave you speechless. He swung his luggage like a weapon, smashing it into a young boy's head as blood splattered across the aisle. Subscribe if you believe no cruelty to the innocent should go unanswered. The moment Ethan Calder felt the jolt against the back of his calf, he turned, not in anger, but with the restrained alertness of a man who'd spent years mastering how to read danger without reacting to it. The metallic thud of a luggage wheel striking his son's foot had been subtle, but deliberate. Noah winced beside him, pulling his foot back slightly as he clutched his camera bag tighter. The boy didn't say anything, but Ethan's eyes narrowed, scanning the man behind them in line. Russell Dane stood tall, thick neck, uneven buzz cut, and a scar that split his left cheek like a bolt of lightning. His hand remained on the upright handle of a large black suitcase, fingers flexing once, then again, like a habit. He met Ethan's gaze, unbothered and unreadable. No apology came. "You all right?" Ethan asked his son quietly, his voice steady but low. Noah gave a small nod, his expression unreadable beneath his shaggy bangs and headphones. He had learned to stay quiet in moments like these. Observe, don't react. The boarding queue inched forward through Gate B14 of Vailport International Airport. Overhead, automated announcements crackled about final call warnings and weather delays. Sunlight poured through the high glass windows, casting long shadows across the carpet. The line crept forward, but Ethan felt the man behind them closing in again. Too close. Another nudge. This time, the hard plastic edge of the suitcase scraped against the heel of Noah's sneaker. Ethan stepped slightly to the side, shielding his son. He turned his head halfway, voice low but firm. "Sir," Ethan said, without raising his voice, "I'd appreciate if you gave us a little space. You've hit my son twice now." Russell offered a crooked smirk, his tone oily. "Yeah? Maybe teach him to move faster. Some of us have real places to be." Ethan stared at him. For a moment, neither man blinked. Behind Russell, an elderly traveler gave them a wary glance before looking away. No airport official seemed to notice, and the crowd continued its slow shuffle toward the jet bridge. The air was warm, the atmosphere oddly heavy, as if something was building beneath the surface. Ethan turned away without replying. Confrontation in a security line was a bad idea. He placed a steadying hand on Noah's shoulder, who was now staring ahead, jaw tight. The camera bag in his grip shifted as he adjusted the strap over his chest. "Dad, that guy," Noah started. "I know," Ethan said softly. "Just breathe." The hum of foot traffic, rolling bags and boarding calls filled the air. A gate agent scanned boarding passes briskly. The line shortened. Ethan's mind flicked through a dozen calculations, like clockwork, emergency exits, crew members, potential delays. He had not planned for conflict. This trip was supposed to be a reward, a celebration for Noah's acceptance into the National Youth Science Competition in Denver. But the man behind them had just changed the tone of the entire morning. The tension now walked beside them. As they stepped onto the jet bridge, the temperature dropped slightly. The narrow hallway echoed with the clatter of suitcase wheels and coughs from tired travelers. Ethan felt the man behind him breathing too close. He didn't turn again, but his jaw flexed. Then he heard it. A faint, muttered phrase from Russell, just loud enough to pierce the space between them. "Typical. Daddy's boy." Spoiled, soft Ethan's pace faltered for just a second. Noah didn't respond, but the boy heard it too. He clutched his bag tighter. The cabin door opened. A flight attendant welcomed them with a corporate smile. "Welcome aboard, gentlemen." Ethan nodded and moved down the aisle, Noah behind him. The cabin was dimmer than the terminal, its air perfumed with recirculated pine-scented freshness. They found their seats, mid-cabin, right side, row 18A and B. Ethan stowed their backpacks under the seats and sat down, adjusting his cuffs. Noah sank into the window seat, earbuds still in, fingers fiddling with the lens cap of his camera. Then came the overhead clatter. Russell arrived, dragging his suitcase down the aisle with a thump-thump rhythm that grated against the hum of settling passengers. Ethan felt his shoulders tense as Russell stopped directly above them, glaring at the overhead bin. The bin was nearly full. He hoisted the heavy bag with a grunt, shoving it hard into the space above Ethan and Noah. The suitcase, caught on a handle, refused to slide. Instead of adjusting it, Russell shoved harder, jaw clenching. The bin creaked. A flight attendant appeared, young, neat uniform, clipped tone. "Sir, if you just turn it sideways, it'll—" "I got it," Russell snapped. The attendant blinked but said nothing more. He moved on. Ethan rose halfway from his seat. "If you rotate the suitcase, it might—" "I said I got it," Russell hissed without looking down. Noah flinched. The suitcase finally slid into place with a metallic clank, barely fitting. Russell forced the bin closed and plopped into the aisle seat across from them with a grunt. Seconds passed. Then, muttering again. "Pampered kids and privileged fathers." Ethan turned his gaze to the window. Outside, the tarmac glowed in morning light, fuel trucks rumbling like beasts through the heat shimmer. But his mind wasn't on the view. It was mapping scenarios, outcomes, exits. This was not a man simply having a bad day. There was venom in the way Russell moved, something performative in his passive aggression, a need to provoke. Noah leaned closer. "Why's he like that?" "I don't know," Ethan replied quietly. "But we don't give him what he wants." Which is exactly what Russell wanted. Reaction. Across the aisle, Russell reclined in his seat, cracking his knuckles and staring straight ahead with a faint smile. Overhead, the intercom buzzed to life. The captain's voice announced, "Final cabin checks." Takeoff in 10 minutes, Ethan adjusted his seatbelt and gave his son a reassuring look. But behind him, he could feel Russell's presence like static. The man's fingers tapped slowly on the luggage handle resting in his lap. Rhythmic, intentional, like a drummer counting down before the drop. Tension wound tight in the cabin, unseen by most, and still Russell's hand lingered on that handle. Sometimes the storm starts long before the thunder is heard. Russell Dane's suitcase hit the metal edge of the overhead bin with a loud, jarring thud. The sound made Noah flinch in his seat below, his hand tightening around the strap of his camera bag. Ethan glanced up, steady and observant. He noticed the man's movements, erratic, sharp, and filled with the kind of forced calm that masked something brewing beneath the surface. "Try turning it sideways," Ethan said calmly, his voice level, offering a solution with the cool detachment of someone who had no interest in confrontation. Russell paused. His eyes flicked downward, first to Ethan, then to Noah, who was now pretending to scroll through his phone but couldn't hide his unease. A slow sneer stretched across Russell's face, as if the suggestion alone had insulted him. "Figures," Russell muttered, his tone low but pointed. "Pampered kids. Privileged fathers. Bet you think this whole row was reserved just for you." Ethan's jaw tensed. He inhaled through his nose and shifted in his seat but didn't rise to the bait. Conflict wasn't new to him, but right now, his priority was Noah, not ego. The suitcase gave a final metallic groan before Russell shoved it in roughly, forcing it into place. The overhead bin creaked, then snapped shut. Russell stepped back with an air of exaggerated triumph, brushing his hands off like he'd just conquered something more than plastic and zippers. Noah leaned toward his father. "I don't like him," he whispered, barely audible over the hum of the air vents. Ethan didn't smile. He just placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Stay calm," he murmured. "It's just a short flight." But the moment didn't pass. Russell didn't sit down right away. Instead, he stood in the aisle for a few seconds longer than necessary, his broad back blocking the row. His fingers hovered at his waist before casually tapping the long, chrome handle of the suitcase he'd just crammed overhead. Tap, tap, tap. A metallic rhythm with no melody, just a slow, deliberate sound that carried an unspoken message. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. The motion was too intentional, like the slow winding of a clock that no one could see ticking. At last, Russell dropped into his seat, directly behind them. The thud of his body in the cushion felt heavier than it should. Noah glanced back, then quickly forward again, his posture shrinking into the space between the armrests. The intercom crackled to life, briefly disrupting the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 719 with non-stop service to Calbridge. We'll be closing the doors shortly. Please ensure carry-ons are stowed and seatbelts fastened." As the cabin shifted into takeoff preparation, the overhead lights dimmed slightly, casting shadows across Ethan's thoughtful expression. He reached up and adjusted the air nozzle above him, more out of habit than discomfort, but his mind wasn't on airflow. It was on the man behind him, the one whose silence felt too loud. Russell had stopped muttering, but now his breathing was slow, audible, measured like someone counting each inhale to stay in control. Ethan noticed the occasional thump of a foot against the floor. Nervous energy, perhaps, or agitation. Either way, it made the space feel smaller. The engines outside began to rumble, and still, that rhythm continued, Russell's fingers lightly drumming the metal handle above him. Tap, tap, tap. Noah shifted again and looked to Ethan. "Dad," he whispered, "he's doing it again." Ethan didn't turn around. He simply nodded, and that nod said everything. "I know. I see it. Stay still." Across the aisle, a businessman in a gray blazer noticed the tension and briefly raised an eyebrow before returning to his tablet. No one else seemed to care, or perhaps they were choosing not to. It was easier that way. But Ethan had spent his career studying systems, patterns, and something in Russell's pattern was off. He wasn't just irritated, he was waiting for something. Ethan exhaled slowly and tightened the seatbelt across his waist. Behind him, Russell leaned back in his chair, but the tapping didn't stop. It only got quieter, more deliberate. Even silence can rattle like a ticking fuse. Russell Dane stood abruptly. The seat creaked as he shoved it back, drawing startled glances from the surrounding passengers. Without warning, he reached into the overhead bin, yanked his hard-shell suitcase out with one hand, and twisted his torso with force. "Maybe you people should learn respect," he shouted. Before anyone could react, before the thought of stopping him could even form, he swung the suitcase downward like a club. There was a sickening crack. The edge of the suitcase collided with Noah Calder's head just above the temple. The blow landed with a blunt, echoing thud that ricocheted through the cabin like the sound of bone snapping under metal. Noah's body jerked sideways, and then he slumped. His small frame collapsed against the armrest, his camera case tumbling to the floor with a soft thud as blood poured from his skull in thin, urgent streams. A beat of silence fell. One breath, maybe two. Then screams, gasps, the shrill click of seatbelts being unfastened. Ethan Calder froze. For that one terrible second he did not move, not because he didn't want to, but because something in him had short-circuited. Then instinct overtook paralysis. He lunged across the seat, catching his son before the boy's head struck the armrest again. Noah's face was pale, shock already setting in. His eyes fluttered. His lips parted, but no words came out, only a low, breathy moan. "Noah." Ethan's voice cracked open with panic. "Noah, look at me. Stay with me. Stay awake." Russell stumbled back a step, still clutching the handle, his breath heavy. There was no remorse in his eyes, not even confusion, only a flicker of satisfaction, as if some deeply seated grudge had been scratched. "He was being disrespectful," Russell muttered, almost to himself. Ethan's head snapped toward him, eyes wide with disbelief. The blood from Noah's wound now soaked Ethan's palm as he pressed it desperately against the gash, trying to stanch the flow. "Get help," someone screamed from row 18. "I need medical, right now. Seat 17C. Kid's been hit bad. A man in a blazer, an off-duty EMT maybe, rushed from the back. "Move aside." "Let me through." Ethan didn't release his grip on his son's shoulders, but he shifted just enough to let the stranger assess the wound. The stranger's jaw tightened. "He's got a skull fracture. Pupils are reacting, but barely. He needs to be taken off this plane now." The flight attendant who'd earlier asked Russell to stow his bag now stood frozen near the galley, wide-eyed. Another crew member behind her activated the cabin phone. "Captain, we have a serious medical emergency. We need gate support." Now, Russell remained standing in the aisle, looking around with the calm of someone who felt above consequence. A murmur swept through the cabin, passengers whispering, some filming, others too stunned to move. "You did that on purpose," Ethan growled, voice low, trembling with fury. Russell's smirk vanished. "I told him to stop making noise." "You people act like you're untouchable." Maybe he needed to learn. Ethan surged forward, but two male passengers held him back. "Not here, sir. Your son needs you," one of them said firmly. Ethan clenched his jaw, breathing through his nose, trying not to break in front of his son, who now lay unconscious, barely stirring. Footsteps pounded from the front of the plane. Security agents boarded, surrounding Russell. One man snapped cuffs around his wrist while reading his rights in a clipped tone. Russell didn't resist. He didn't flinch. "This is all blown out of proportion," he scoffed. "You'll see." Ethan turned away, unable to look at the man a second longer. He stared down at his son, gently brushing Noah's hair from his bloodied forehead. "You're okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince, Noah or himself. The aisle cleared as medics boarded with a stretcher. Ethan moved with them, never letting go of Noah's hand. As the stretcher rolled past Russell, the man sneered. "You're raising a weak generation." One of the security agents shoved him forward. "Keep walking." The cabin fell silent again, not from calm, but from shock. And in that eerie hush, a haunting truth settled over everyone on board. In a single heartbeat, the journey turned into a nightmare. Russell's shout split the cabin like a gunshot. Before anyone could comprehend what was happening, the hardshell suitcase came crashing down toward Noah. The blow landed with a sickening thud, the sound echoing through the narrow fuselage as though the plane itself had gasped. Noah's head snapped sideways, his body folding into the seat as crimson streaks blossomed across his temple and cheek. For a heartbeat, the entire cabin froze, passengers suspended between disbelief and horror until the first scream cut through the air. Ethan's instincts surged before thought could catch up. He lunged across the narrow aisle, catching his son as he slid limp from the seat. "Noah!" "Look at me." His voice cracked with a raw urgency he had never heard from himself before. He pressed trembling napkins from the seat pocket against the gash, his hands quickly slick with his child's blood. The scent of iron filled the air, sharp and metallic. Around him, chaos erupted. Passengers scrambled from their seats, some shouting for help, others fumbling with phones, their faces pale and stricken. Two flight attendants rushed forward. One, a stocky man with clipped hair, grabbed Russell's arm, his voice trembling as he barked, "Sir, sit down. You've assaulted a passenger." Russell twisted away, sneering. It was an accident. But his tone carried no regret, only defiance. His knuckles whitened around the handle, his body rigid as if daring someone to challenge him further. The other attendant, eyes wide with fear, blocked the aisle to prevent him from lunging again. A medic rose from a rear seat, revealing a badge from a local clinic clipped to his shirt. "I'm trained," he said firmly, kneeling beside Ethan. His hands moved swiftly, checking Noah's pulse and breathing. "Keep pressure here." "We need to stabilize him before we move." Ethan's heart pounded against his ribs like a drum. He could hear every second stretching, his own breath ragged as he tried to focus on the medic's instructions. Around them, a baby wailed. Someone prayed under his breath, and the overhead lights flickered as the captain's voice came over the intercom. "This is the captain. Remain seated." Emergency services have been called. Ethan glanced up at Russell, who was now pinned against the bulkhead by two attendants. The man's eyes burned with a twisted satisfaction, and Ethan felt an icy rage coil in his chest. He wanted to rise, to confront him, but Noah's weak groan anchored him. "Stay with me, son," he whispered, pressing closer. "Stay awake." Noah's eyelids fluttered, unfocused, his lips pale. "Don't. Let him get away," he murmured, barely audible. The words sliced through Ethan like a blade. They weren't just a plea. They were a charge, an order passed from son to father. The plane jolted as the engines powered down for an emergency stop at the gate. Minutes later, paramedics swarmed the aisle, their green uniforms a flash of order amid the panic. "We're taking him now," one said briskly, sliding a stretcher beside the row. They lifted Noah gently, securing a neck brace as they worked. Ethan followed, his hands still red, his thoughts a storm. He looked once more at Russell, who was now being led away by airport security for questioning, still muttering his innocence. The man's smirk flickered for just a moment, like someone confident his trouble would soon vanish. As they wheeled Noah down the jetway, the cool air from the terminal hit Ethan's face, but it did nothing to steady him. His mind raced through everything, what he had seen in Russell's eyes, the arrogance of his denial, the quiet way the attendants avoided looking at him. He felt a shiver of realization. This wasn't random. Russell's cruelty had been deliberate, not a sudden flare of temper, but something practiced, perhaps even rehearsed. The thought planted itself deep, a seed of suspicion that would not go away. Inside the emergency terminal clinic, sterile white walls and the hum of machines replaced the cabin's chaos. Doctors moved quickly, their calm efficiency a sharp contrast to Ethan's trembling hands. One physician, a tall man with glasses, turned to him. "Your son has a skull fracture and a concussion," he said carefully. "He's stable for now. He'll live." Relief hit Ethan like a wave, but it crashed against the jagged edges of rage and helplessness. He stepped back, blood drying on his cuffs, watching his son breathe under sedation. Through the glass window of the clinic door, Ethan saw airport security escorting Russell across the corridor for questioning. Cameras flashed as bystanders recorded on their phones. For a moment, Ethan imagined the headlines, the inevitable spin, the shallow apology that would follow. His jaw tightened. This would not end like that. Not with an apology, not with a fine. There was something deeper behind Russell's hatred, a deliberate cruelty that demanded exposure. Ethan's eyes drifted back to Noah's still form, and he felt his son's whispered words echo again in his mind like a vow. "Don't let him get away." He straightened slowly, his palms curling into fists at his sides. He was no longer just a father tending to an injured boy. He was a man who had been handed a purpose. The sound of his son's heartbeat monitor clicked steadily, like a metronome counting down to action. Outside the clinic, the airport bustled, unaware that a line had been crossed. Ethan's voice was low but steady as he whispered to himself, the words more promise than thought. "What begins in blood must end in truth." The clock on the wall barely ticked above 2 a.m. when Ethan Calder sat alone in the dimly lit waiting room of Valeport Emergency Terminal. His knuckles were still stained with Noah's blood, dried into the creases of his palms like scars. The sterile scent of disinfectant clashed with the bitter aftertaste of adrenaline, still coursing through his veins. The hospital's quiet hum only amplified the echo of that terrible moment, the crack of the luggage handle, the dull thud of Noah's skull, and the sickening silence that followed. He could still feel the weight of his son's body collapsing into his arms. Across the hall, past a glass pane streaked with fingerprints and tension, Noah lay sedated, a thick bandage wrapped around his head. A soft beeping came from his monitor, steady but distant. Ethan hadn't spoken in nearly an hour. He hadn't needed to. His silence was focused, calculating, not numb, but narrow, as if every emotion was being compressed into a single line of resolve. The door hissed open behind him. "Mr. Calder?" a young officer called quietly. "Just wanted to let you know, Russell Dane's been released." Ethan slowly turned his head, his eyes sharpening. Released? Airport security held him, but no charge was filed. They said there wasn't sufficient evidence of intent. The officer looked away, uncomfortable under Ethan's piercing stare. He claimed it was an accident. Ethan blinked once. Then he nodded, almost too calmly. "Thank you." The officer hesitated, then left. The door clicked shut. Ethan stared straight ahead. His jaw twitched. Lack of intent. The phrase swirled in his mind like poison in a glass of water. That wasn't just a technicality, it was an insult. He stood and walked to the window separating him from Noah's room. The boy's face looked peaceful in sleep, but it was a deception, a skull fracture, a concussion. The doctors were hopeful, but not certain. Ethan could feel his breath growing colder as thoughts turned from grief to something else, precision. He had spent his entire adult life designing systems, networks that moved data, tracked cargo, and managed risk. He understood patterns better than most, and he could spot when something didn't belong. Russell's behavior hadn't been spontaneous. The swing of the bag had been deliberate, aimed, not a clumsy mistake. There was no doubt in Ethan's mind. He pulled out his laptop, the glow illuminating the grim lines of his face. The hospital Wi-Fi was locked behind credentials, but Ethan had his own tools, secure access from a consulting contract he had just concluded with Vailport's infrastructure division. Within moments, he was inside the airport's internal database. Security logs, incident records, maintenance reports. He moved quickly but methodically, like a man disarming a bomb he'd built himself. He searched Russell Dane's name. What he found chilled him. There were incident reports, more than one. Multiple airlines, different terminals, each labeled with vague summaries. Passenger dispute, verbal aggression, baggage complaint escalated. Every one of them ended the same way. Resolved quietly, no charges filed. Some even had internal notes indicating a settlement arranged. Ethan leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. This wasn't a fluke. This was a pattern. He cross-referenced Russell's name with corporate affiliations and employment history. The connection was buried in procurement logs. Halveron Transit, a major logistics firm that subcontracted with airport operations across 3 regional hubs. Ethan knew the name. They provided ground services, baggage logistics, and had indirect control over flight loadouts. More importantly, Halveron had deep contractual ties with Vailport's freight management systems. He's protected, Ethan thought. Someone has been shielding him. He clicked through more files, opening passenger manifests and gate assignments, matching timelines. Russell's movements weren't random. He had flown on routes covered by Halveron-connected services, always last-minute bookings, always in dispute with staff. Every time, it had been swept under the rug. Ethan opened a blank digital document and began typing. A timeline. Names, gate numbers, airline connections, contractor overlaps. By the time he looked up again, nearly 2 hours had passed. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse's soft footsteps echoed, and Ethan glanced toward Noah's room. Still resting. Still safe, for now. He tapped the keyboard one final time, saved the file, and closed the screen. His reflection stared back at him in the black glass, pale, hollow-eyed, and stone-cold. But beneath the exhaustion burned something stronger. Russell had swung a metal handle with rage and shattered a boy's skull. But Ethan had spent a career learning how to use handles, real and metaphorical, to unlock systems, disable lies, and reroute power. This wasn't going to end with apologies or hush money. He stood slowly, his voice low but unwavering as he looked once more toward his son. He used a handle to harm my son. I'll use the same handle to break his world. The image of his son bleeding in his arms had barely left Ethan's mind when he sat down at the long oak desk in his home office that evening. His suit jacket hung limply over the back of the chair, and his tie was still knotted, loosened but not removed, as if undressing completely meant letting go of the fire inside him. The lights were dim. Noah rested in the hospital, stable but silent, and Ethan's world had narrowed to a single objective. This would not be forgotten. It would not be forgiven. He didn't start with anger. He started with structure. First, he wrote down names. Every flight attendant in the cabin, every passenger seated near them, every doctor who had touched Noah's chart, and Russell Dane. He circled that name 3 times. Then came the files. He requested the flight manifest using a back-end channel linked to his data consultant license, flagged and archived every bit of social media chatter around Flight 742B, and pulled security cam footage from Vailport's Gate 14 through a quiet contact in airport systems infrastructure. The man didn't ask questions. He knew Ethan's work, but this wouldn't be solved alone. The first call went to Marcus Bell, an old friend and former military investigator. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice gruff with sleep but alert. "Russell Dane assaulted Noah," Ethan said plainly. "I need help." There was a pause. Then, "What do you want done?" "Find out who's shielding him." Quietly, Marcus arrived the next day with a single duffel bag and a burner phone. He didn't ask to see Noah. He knew the look in Ethan's eyes said more than a visit ever could. Next, Ethan contacted Dr. Lyle Hargrove, the neurosurgeon who had treated Noah. Hargrove owed him a debt from years ago, a charity Ethan funded that saved the hospital from closing a pediatric wing. Ethan didn't even have to mention it. "I'll document everything," Hargrove said, flipping through Noah's scans with a grim frown. This wasn't just a bump. That blow was targeted, downward, full force. The recovery will be long, and if you need me to testify, I will. Then came Jonah Price, a lean, precise man who had once taken down a regional security firm for hiding abuse allegations. Jonah didn't work for money. He worked for cause. "I'm in," Jonah said after seeing the video stills of Noah slumped over his seat. "But we'll be going against more than a man. If this guy's connected to Halveron Transit like you say, they're known for buying silence." Ethan nodded. "Then we build louder evidence." He started cataloging. Terminal security footage showed Russell moving through checkpoints with 2 men, both in Halveron jackets. Their laughter, faint on the audio feed, was followed by a gesture Ethan recognized instantly. Russell mimicking a swing with his suitcase handle. "Did you catch that?" Ethan asked Marcus, rewinding it again. Marcus leaned closer, his expression dark. "That's not stress. That's rehearsal." They matched timestamps. 15 minutes later, the 3 men had separated. Russell boarded Flight 742B while the others exited the terminal through a non-passenger gate. Unusual and suspicious. Meanwhile, Jonah had begun reviewing past court records. Russell had 5 closed incident reports in the last 4 years. All settled, all buried, and all involving complaints of aggression in transit hubs. "Halveron has a routine," Jonah said. "They pay off the noise and seal the cracks with NDAS. We're not just fighting one man, Ethan. We're about to rattle a network Ethan already knew. He had spent his career reverse engineering data systems. He recognized patterns. And Russell's path of unchecked violence wasn't a glitch. It was a design. One supported by bureaucracy, by convenience, and by fear. "I'm going to break it," Ethan whispered. By midnight, maps covered his desk. Arrows connected cities. Names overlapped between logistics contracts and flight security incidents. Russell's name showed up on employment sheets for Halveron's regional hubs in 3 states, each tied to a violent episode, yet not a single criminal conviction. Jonah studied the patterns with growing awe. This is coordinated. There's no way HR doesn't know. which means they're protecting him, or worse, encouraging silence. "Then we'll speak louder," Ethan replied. The next day, Marcus tracked down a witness, a young man who had flown from Denver 3 weeks earlier. He recalled seeing Russell near Gate 14 the morning of Noah's attack. "He was swinging that handle around like practicing," the witness said, his voice shaky. "I thought it was weird, like a joke. But now it's not funny." That small detail, dismissed in the moment, was the first real thread suggesting premeditation. It turned the incident from outburst to intention, from impulse to assault. Jonah read over the notes and narrowed his eyes. If we can show premeditation and link it to Halveron's negligence, we have grounds for a multi-tier civil case and maybe criminal referral. "Not maybe," Ethan said, voice low. "We're going to court, but we're also going to make this public." Jonah hesitated. "Are you sure? If you go public now, they'll come after your reputation. Threats, smear campaigns. You'll need to protect Noah." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I've spent my life building systems that spot hidden failure points. This time, I'm not just spotting them, I'm going to break them open." He rehearsed his testimony aloud that night, speaking to the empty room as if the jury sat before him. He imagined Russell's sneer, the blood on Noah's temple, the silence that followed. He saw every door that corporate protection had locked, and he visualized himself holding the handle that would open them. "If a man uses a handle to shatter a life," he said softly, gripping the bent suitcase handle now wrapped in evidence plastic, "I will turn that handle into the key that opens every locked door he hides behind." The teenage boy collapsed, blood running down his face while the passenger sneered, calling it an accident. What he didn't know was who the boy's father truly was. If you believe every act of violence must be answered, hit subscribe now. Justice starts here. The video clip started with laughter, slurred, arrogant, unmistakably male. Russell Dane stood in the corner of a cluttered backyard lit by citronella torches and half-buried floodlights. A beer in one hand, his other gesturing wildly, he leaned toward 2 men seated at a plastic patio table. "Sometimes," Russell slurred with a grin, "you gotta teach a boy some manners." That one thought he was untouchable. "But I made an example." The camera jolted as the off-duty contractor, Penn, shifted awkwardly. His phone caught only part of Russell's face, half obscured by shadow, but the voice was clear, confident, cold. The words sat in Ethan's gut like a stone. He rewound the clip again, playing it on Marcus's tablet inside the conference room they'd quietly rented above a bookstore downtown. The walls were soundproof. Still, the silence between the men was deafening. Ethan finally spoke, his voice quiet but sharp. "That's premeditation." He was planning something. This wasn't spontaneous rage. Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "And Penn just posted this on a private contractor forum 2 days ago. Thought it was just gossip until he connected it to the case Jonah paced near the window, the subpoena folder under his arm. I can file immediately, but Halveron's going to resist hard. If this is how deep it runs, they won't open their records willingly." They didn't. Halveron's legal response arrived within 48 hours. They declined access to internal communications, citing proprietary data integrity and employee privacy protections. In legal terms, it was a barricade. In Ethan's mind, it was an admission. "We expected that," Jonah muttered, tapping the refusal letter. "So we go the indirect route." Dr. Hargrove joined via secure video link later that evening. He was already reviewing Noah's CT scans for litigation. But now Ethan asked for something more. "I want an expert affidavit," Ethan said firmly. "Detail the angle, the injury path, the velocity. I want the luggage handle analyzed like a weapon." Hargrove didn't blink. "You'll have it." The next day, Ethan delivered the luggage to a forensics lab, where a retired military engineer now specialized in non-traditional blunt force trauma simulations. Watching a metal arm replicate the suitcase swing felt surreal. Watching it slam into a rubber skull and leave a crack nearly identical to Noah's made it horrifyingly real. Meanwhile, online murmurs grew. An anonymous user posted images of Noah's bandaged head and bruised temple, captioned, "Passenger's son attacked mid-flight." Airline silent. It spread like dry grass catching fire. Reporters reached out. One from Channel 8 requested a live interview. Ethan refused. "Not yet," he told Marcus. "We win with evidence, not emotion." But Jonah, always strategic, saw an opportunity. He selected a trusted journalist from a small legal affairs blog and quietly leaked key facts: Noah's injury report, the refusal of Halvaron to release data, a blurred screenshot from Penn's video. It was enough to stir public doubt without revealing the full scope of their plan. That same night, Halvaron blinked. Their legal team reached out with a polished proposal: a closed-door mediation, a generous settlement, and internal review assurances. Confidential, of course. Ethan didn't hesitate. "No." Jonah looked up. "You sure?" "I don't want hush money. I want exposure. I want it public." They met, silence. 3 days later, Ethan arrived at his office to find an envelope slid under the door. No return address. Inside, a sheet of paper with 2 words, typed, "Drop it." The message chilled him, not because of the threat, but because of its arrogance. That someone believed he could be bought or scared into silence. That someone had entered his building, found his floor, and left without a trace. Later that evening, his phone buzzed. A restricted number. He answered. A man's voice whispered, "Think of your family." Let it go. The line went dead. Ethan looked at Noah's photo on his desk, the boy's crooked smile, the healing scar just visible near the temple. He stood without a word, grabbed his coat, and met Marcus at the car. They drove to a local print center and made physical copies of every report, image, affidavit, and subpoena request. They kept one set in a locked safe, and another was mailed under a pseudonym to Jonah's father in another state. They were building a firewall of truth. Then Marcus delivered the real blow. "I found something." He slid a printed spreadsheet across the table. It listed payments from Halvaron to a consulting company called Terravale Services. The recipient name on the transfers? Darren Sloat, a middle manager in Halvaron's operations division. "Shell company," Marcus said, "funneling payouts." Disguised as vendor disbursements, Jonah's eyes lit up. This is it. If we prove that pattern, we move from injury case to conspiracy. The mood shifted. This wasn't just about Russell's violence anymore. This was about the system that gave him cover. Ethan looked out the window, his breath fogging the glass. Across the city, Halvaron's headquarters glowed with corporate power, a tower of glass and steel. But glass can shatter. He turned back to his team, voice steady. "Prepare the subpoenas for Terravale's financials." "I want every penny traced," Marcus gave a grim smile. "Already started." And as Jonah scribbled a note on the legal pad beside him, Ethan leaned back in his chair, the weight of the war settling on his shoulders, but not crushing him. He felt stronger now, sharper. The threats only clarified the stakes. They thought buying silence would bury the truth. They forgot how clumsy money is at hiding guilt. The knock came at 3:07 a.m., soft, deliberate, and out of rhythm with the silence of Ethan's apartment. Marcus stood in the doorway, holding his phone up with one gloved hand and a grim look on his face. "You need to see this," he said quietly. Inside, under the pale glow of the kitchen light, Ethan scrolled through a voicemail Marcus had received from an unknown number. The voice was male, tight with nerves. "My name is Amory Dane. I'm Russell's younger brother. I need to talk to someone about what he's done, what we've all helped him get away with. I can't keep quiet anymore." Ethan leaned forward slowly, his eyes narrowing. "You think it's legit?" "He left a callback number," Marcus replied. checked out. It's a burner, but registered near his workplace. We can set a meet. Ethan didn't hesitate. Let's do it, but carefully. By noon, they met in the corner booth of a rundown diner on the edge of Marion Street. Amory sat hunched in a gray hoodie, fingers curled around a half-empty mug of coffee. His leg bounced under the table, eyes darting toward the windows every few seconds. Ethan watched him closely, reading everything. The nervous gestures, the guilt-ridden posture, the way he avoided saying Russell's name directly. "I was just a kid when the first thing happened," Amory began, voice raw. "Our parents always told us to protect family no matter what. But Russell, he's not just angry, he's dangerous. And the worst part? People let him be." He slid a crumpled paper napkin across the table. On it were scribbled notations, names, dollar amounts, and references to settlements. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "It's from a ledger," Amory explained. "Russ keeps everything. Handwritten. Keeps it tucked in a drawer inside his old flip phone like some kind of trophy case. I only saw it once, during an argument. I snapped photos of the screen before he noticed. I didn't know what to do with them. Until I saw what happened to your boy, Ethan felt a cold chill wash over him. The names on that napkin weren't random. They matched witness reports Jonah had flagged from unrelated incidents, cases that had all ended quietly. Amory had brought them a blueprint of Russell's protected past. Marcus leaned in. "We'll need to authenticate this. Can you get us the photos?" Amory nodded. "They're still on the phone I used?" "I've been too scared to erase them." Ethan tapped the table once, decision made. "We'll retrieve it." Quietly. No police. Not yet. That evening, Marcus called in a favor from a locksmith named Harold, a retired maintenance supervisor who owed him for clearing a case years ago. Harold posed as a building tech responding to a fake maintenance request and gained entry to Russell's apartment. The phone, exactly where Amory said it would be, was tucked inside a drawer beneath expired coupons and a broken key fob. Inside the phone's photo folder, Marcus found a hidden album, 12 images of a ragged black notebook, each page lined with meticulous handwriting. Names, amounts, abbreviations for airline incidents. One page stood out, a payment entry labeled VH Gate 14, pre-check demonstration. Ethan froze. That was the gate where another witness had seen Russell swinging his bag like a club days before the attack. Jonah had the ledger authenticated by 2 independent experts, a handwriting analyst and a forensic accountant. Both confirmed the writing was Russell's and the payment flow linked to shell companies. One of those companies had financial trails that led not to private citizens, but to a government contractor listed under Halveron's Transit Procurement Division. Then came the real explosion. Marcus traced one of the listed shell companies, Granford Solutions, LLC, to a public-private development board where Councilman Evelyn Pritchard held a seat. Halveron had 3 contracts with the city approved under that board in the last 18 months. It was a subtle but damning link between public office and private silence. Ethan, pacing his living room with the pages laid out like evidence on a war table, knew they had reached a cliff's edge. This was no longer just about Russell's violence. It was now tangled in a web of political protection, corporate hush money, and a municipal pipeline that had insulated predators for years. "Should we go public?" Marcus asked. Jonah shook his head. "Not yet. If we rush it, they'll spin it. We go to court. We let the system reveal itself." Ethan nodded slowly. "We present the ledger, Marcus's testimonies, Dr. Hargrove's affidavits. We control the flow, but we prepare for pushback, legal and personal." He rehearsed his court presentation every night, how he'd frame the ledger not just as evidence but as indictment, how he'd anticipate defense strategies, predict every angle they'd use to discredit Amory, how to shield Noah from being used as a symbol without silencing his truth. Every word mattered. Every fact had to land like a stone through stained glass. Because what Amory had delivered wasn't just documentation, It was the first honest crack in a wall built on silence, protection, and power. And the world behind that wall wasn't ready for what was coming. When family money shields a man, a single ledger can become a sledgehammer. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise," and the tension in the courtroom shifted like a storm rolling in from the sea. Ethan Calder stood motionless, one hand gently gripping the bench in front of him as the judge entered. Cameras clicked from the press pit. The air smelled of wood polish and nerves. The trial had begun. Jonah Price, calm but alert, rose first. His suit was pressed, his brief glinting with prepared resolve. "Your Honor," he began, voice even but sharp, "this is not a case about an accident. It is about a pattern, one rooted in aggression, silence, and power abused through protection." Ethan sat, jaw tight, eyes fixed ahead. His thoughts flicked momentarily to Noah, recovering but still tender, and then back to the man seated across the aisle. Russell Dane, his scar faintly catching the courtroom lights, smirked as if the entire proceeding were beneath him. Jonah called Marcus Bell to the stand first. The former investigator stepped forward with practiced control. "I conducted interviews with passengers across 3 flights," Marcus said, his voice low and deliberate. "All reference the same behavior, aggressive baggage handling, verbal jabs, moments that teetered on violence. One described Mr. Dane bragging about straightening out certain passengers. They thought he was joking. On a monitor beside the jury, Penn's video played. The grainy footage wobbled but was unmistakable. Russell's voice, his laugh, his words. Sometimes kids just need a reminder who's stronger." Audible gasps rippled through the room. Then came Dr. Hargrove. He laid out medical reports with the grim precision of a surgeon. Noah Calder sustained a depressed skull fracture. That is not the result of incidental contact. The luggage used had a reinforced alloy frame, sufficient to cause major trauma when swung with force. Halveron's lead counsel, Frederick Minter, objected to the tone, but was overruled. He regrouped with practiced ease. "We do not deny Mr. Dane acted poorly," he admitted, pacing slowly. "But Halveron Transit did not sanction or protect that behavior. There was no corporate conspiracy." Jonah rose again, ledger in hand. "Then explain this," he said, holding the book high before walking it to the jury. "This is a personal ledger from Mr. Dane's own apartment. It lists payment amounts beside initials and flight dates. These match known settlement dates from Halveron's own contractors." The courtroom froze as the jurors leaned forward. Minter attempted to object again, citing hearsay, but Jonah was ready. "The handwriting has been verified by 2 forensic experts. The payments traced to shell companies, all connected back to Halveron's procurement arm. Halveron's team scrambled. Minter pivoted quickly to discredit Amory Dane, calling him a bitter brother trying to ride his sibling's downfall. But Amory, calm and direct, stood his ground. "I came forward because I watched him hurt people and brag about it. And I watched our family cover for him over and over. Tension snapped like a drawn wire when a Halveron executive, Henry Voss, was called under subpoena. Pale and sweating, he resisted at first. But under pressure, his voice cracked. Yes, there were protocols. Legal asked us to keep incidents internal. We were told not to escalate unless fatalities occurred." His eyes darted to the jury, then to Russell, who now shifted uneasily for the first time. The judge leaned forward. "Are you saying management instructed staff to conceal violent incidents?" Voss nodded once. "Yes, sir." It was a needle through the defense's balloon. But the moment of combustion came next, unexpectedly. A voice cut through the silence from the prosecutor's table. "Your Honor, based on the evidence presented, the ledger, Mr. Voss's statement, and financial links, we are moving to open a grand jury referral. Grounds: conspiracy to obstruct justice, criminal negligence, and corporate concealment of violence." Jonah blinked, caught off guard. That wasn't part of their plan. Ethan turned sharply, heart thudding. The judge paused, then nodded gravely. "So ordered." Minter stood abruptly. "This is outrageous." "My clients." The judge slammed the gavel once. "Sit down, counselor." The courtroom erupted. Reporters dashed for the doors, murmurs rippling like a rising tide. Outside, security tightened as word spread. Protesters lined the steps, some holding signs demanding justice for Noah Calder, others defending Halveron's reputation. The city itself seemed split in half by the proceedings. Back inside, Ethan stayed seated, his breath steady but shallow. He looked to the gallery where Noah sat quietly, face pale but eyes firm. Their gaze met across the chaos. Ethan felt something shift, not in the case, but within himself. His son, once broken and bleeding, now sat as a silent witness to justice beginning to stir. And in that gaze, Ethan found his resolve hardened into something immovable. He whispered to himself the words that echoed beneath the gavel's echo, the camera clicks, and the prosecutor's declaration. The law moved faster than rumors, and once a grand jury smells blood, it rarely forgets the taste. The door to the grand jury chamber shut with a dull thud, sealing away months of quiet dread and mounting pressure. Witnesses filed in under sealed summons, faces pale, eyes darting with the unease of men carrying secrets. Behind the curtain of procedural routine, a storm of accountability began to churn. Halveron's upper ranks scrambled before the proceedings even started. Within hours of the first subpoena, they issued a carefully worded public statement pledging full cooperation with all relevant authorities. But behind closed doors, they moved quickly, retaining an elite crisis PR firm to shape public opinion, rewriting internal memos to erase timelines, and instructing executives to limit digital correspondence. Still, the momentum had shifted. For the first time, Ethan Calder wasn't chasing justice. It was chasing them. The real break came not with a bang, but a paper trail. Buried in thousands of pages of financial records and internal emails, the name Leonard Crowe appeared again and again, vice president of logistics, high-ranking enough to authorize contracts, but not so high as to be untouchable. Marcus Bell, sifting through metadata, found timestamps that coincided suspiciously with previous assault settlements. Jonah Price suggested an aggressive play, corner Crowe with the ledger's handwriting samples, the emails, and the financial receipts, and offer immunity in exchange for full cooperation. The gamble worked. Cornered by mounting evidence and terrified of prison, Leonard folded. "They told us to bury it," he said during a sealed deposition, voice shaking, eyes avoiding the camera. "We weren't just quiet. We were trained to be quiet." He revealed that Halveron managers had been instructed through encrypted memos to handle incidents quietly and flagged high-risk employees not for discipline, but for insulation, shielding them from exposure through coordinated payouts. Leonard handed over a list. 23 names. 23 people who had received settlement payments in the past 7 years, each one with a date, an amount, and a silent clause attached. And at the bottom of the list sat a final transfer, coded but unmistakable, sent to a consulting firm linked to Evelyn Pritchard, a city councilman who had long championed Halveron's contracts. Ethan stared at the document in silence, the printed page trembling slightly in his hand. Marcus looked over his shoulder. "He's in this deeper than anyone thought." Within days, Pritchard's office issued a late-night press release announcing his resignation. He denied wrongdoing but cited undue pressure and a desire not to distract from the council's work. But Ethan knew better. It wasn't pressure, it was exposure. As the grand jury's engine roared forward, Halveron retaliated like a wounded animal. Their attorneys launched a flurry of countersuits, challenging the admissibility of the ledger, the testimony of Leonard Crowe, and even Noah's medical records. A whisper campaign began online, anonymous posts accusing Ethan of using his son's injury to fuel a political vendetta. Edited images circulated with headlines questioning Ethan's motivations, his parenting, his agenda. One morning, Ethan found a hand-delivered envelope under his office door. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a printed message in block letters, "Drop it before you lose more than your case." Ethan stared at the words, then quietly slid the paper into a folder labeled Threat Documentation. He didn't speak of it to Noah. Not yet. Meanwhile, Jonah and Marcus went on the offensive. Jonah built a timeline of events and uploaded redacted versions of court filings and authenticated emails to a secure site, allowing journalists and independent watchdogs to verify their legitimacy. Marcus traced IP addresses connected to the disinformation campaign, some linked to Halveron's PR contractor. They shared the findings with the grand jury in a closed-door session, strengthening the case for obstruction. Still, the strain weighed on Ethan. Between depositions, hearings, and media frenzies, he remained Noah's constant. He drove him to physical therapy appointments, where each step forward was matched with a wince. He sat quietly during evaluations, listening to doctors speak in low tones about post-concussive monitoring and long-term cognitive care. Noah never complained, but one afternoon, before a key hearing, Ethan lingered in the hallway with his son. The courthouse loomed behind them, its stone facade cold and impassive. Noah looked up, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached out and squeezed his father's hand. "Dad," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Make sure they remember what they did." Ethan turned to look at him fully. The boy's eyes, once filled with fear, now burned with quiet resolve. For a moment, Ethan felt the courtroom fade away. The noise, the suits, the headlines, all dissolved. What remained was this: a son's pain and a father's vow. He nodded once, voice low, "I will." And in that moment, Ethan knew. No matter how long the trial stretched, no matter how cruel the attacks became, he would not be moved. Not because of pride, not because of vengeance, because his son had asked him to, and that meant everything. Justice, when slow, demands a stubborn pulse to keep it alive. The televised interview cut through the calm like a blade. "I was framed. This whole thing is political," Russell Dane declared, sitting stiffly across from the primetime anchor, his blazer barely hiding the smirk curled into his face. "Mr. Calder's just a tech guy trying to play hero. My family's been targeted. My rights were ignored." Inside the quiet hospital ward, the television volume had been muted, but the closed captions scrolled steadily. Ethan Calder stood beside his son, Noah, who was finishing a short round of physical therapy down the hall. For a moment, Ethan stared at the screen in stunned silence, not because he believed a word of it, but because Russell's audacity had finally reached its breaking point. The same man who had shattered Noah's skull with a luggage handle was now calling himself a victim on national television. Ethan's jaw locked, but before he could say anything, his phone buzzed. A single text from Marcus. "Leaked the footage. Check the feeds in 3, 2... Ethan lifted his phone just in time to see the breaking news alert flash across every major social platform. Internal body cam footage, grainy but clear, showed Russell in handcuffs during his initial airport arrest. And then came the moment that sealed public opinion. Russell, looking over his shoulder, chuckling with smug satisfaction and muttering, "Bet he won't mouth off next time." That one clip, a 6-second avalanche, crushed any sympathy his interview may have earned. Public outrage reignited instantly. Hashtags trended. Commentators flipped. Talk show hosts canceled Russell's media appearances before the hour ended. Later that night, as the hospital halls dimmed and Noah leaned gently on Ethan's arm for balance, the boy whispered, "If they ask. I want to testify someday. I want to say what it felt like." Ethan looked at him, heart swelling with both pride and ache. He crouched to meet his son's steady eyes. "You can," he said softly. "But sometimes silence speaks louder, when truth already echoes." They walked in silence for a few more paces before Ethan's phone rang. Jonah. "Ethan," Jonah said without preamble, his voice tight with urgency. "Halveron's compliance team just folded. They turned over everything Ethan stopped walking." "What do you mean, everything?" "Archived settlements. Decades worth," Jonah replied. "There's no denying it now. They covered it all up, dozens of payouts, NDAS, internal reports buried under contractual discretion. This isn't just a company policy. This is a system. Your case blew it wide open." Ethan felt the air shift around him. The weight of months, of blood, of pain, of research, of defiance, suddenly crystallized into one clear truth. This wasn't just personal anymore. It hadn't been for some time. And now, with the records in hand and public opinion on their side, the storm could no longer be held back. In the reflection of the hospital window, father and son stood side by side, one scarred in body, the other in purpose, but both upright, both unshaken. What began as a personal case now threatened to redefine industry ethics. When truth starts to roll downhill, even giants can't stand in its path. The verdict landed like thunder. Inside the packed courtroom, time seemed to hang on the edge of a blade. Every eye was fixed forward, every breath held, as the foreperson of the jury stood. The rustle of papers, the tightening of hands on armrests, the twitch of a reporter's pen, each sound and movement felt amplified under the weight of what was about to be spoken. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Halveron Transit, liable for negligence, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and willful concealment of violent conduct." Gasps broke through the silence like cracks in glass. For a moment, the entire chamber froze. Then came the swelling noise, reporters scrambling to send messages, a muffled sob from the gallery, the rustle of legal teams shifting in their seats. On the prosecution's bench, Jonah Price exhaled slowly, his fingers still wrapped around a pen he hadn't written with in over 10 minutes. His shoulders eased, but his eyes stayed sharp, already measuring the ripple effect this moment would carry. Ethan Calder sat motionless, his gaze fixed ahead. The words had reached him, but he let them sink slowly. His son, Noah, sat a few rows back wearing a neat collared shirt, a brace still faintly visible beneath his jacket. The boy's smile was soft, but his eyes burned with something older than his years. Relief, pride, and something Ethan recognized too well. Understanding. He had lived through it, not just the pain, but the echo of what it meant. On the other side of the room, the Halveron executives looked gutted. The lead counsel, a graying man with polished shoes and empty excuses, shuffled through his notes as if hoping a hidden line of defense might still appear. It wouldn't. The judge's gavel came down, firm and final. "Sentencing for Mr. Russell Dane will proceed. He is hereby convicted of aggravated assault and sentenced to 8 years in a federal correctional facility. This court recommends psychological evaluation and mandatory rehabilitation." Russell, now thinner and paler than during his first appearance, didn't react. His jaw was clenched, his stare fixed on the table in front of him. Beside him, his attorney said nothing. The judge wasn't finished. "This court further refers the findings of the financial records, internal communications, and executive statements to federal investigators for consideration of broader corruption charges against the Halveron Board of Directors." This time, the murmur in the crowd turned to open noise, commentators whispering to cameras, some spectators clapping before the bailiff hushed them. One of the executives stood abruptly, whispering to his lawyer before storming out. The image would be replayed across news segments for days. Then came the final terms, born from months of unflinching negotiation by Ethan and his team. The court ratified Ethan's demands into binding regulation, mandatory behavior monitoring for all airline and transit staff, public databases for passenger complaints, and the establishment of an independent oversight body, funded by the very corporations it would investigate. It wasn't just a verdict. It was a blueprint for change. As the judge adjourned, the room buzzed. Cameras flashed, microphones jutted forward. Some reporters were already outside, broadcasting to a waiting nation. In the center of the chaos, Ethan rose slowly, still composed. Marcus Bell appeared at his side, clapping a hand on his shoulder. His voice was low, warm. "You did it, brother." "It's over." Ethan turned his head slightly, eyes still trained on the rows of media and the legal teams packing up. "It's not over," he said quietly. He looked beyond the cameras, past the columns and the buzzing hallway, toward something bigger. Russell was going to prison. Halveron's board was now under criminal investigation. But Ethan's gaze wasn't focused on punishment. It was focused on momentum. He saw Noah stand from the gallery, moving through the rows, steady on his feet but slower than before. Their eyes met, and in the look exchanged between father and son was an entire unspoken conversation. Survival, endurance, purpose. Noah had once whispered, "Don't let him get away." And now, Ethan had done more than that. He'd changed what getting away with it even meant. One reporter near the aisle caught the moment. He whispered into his mic, "This is the man who made the system flinch." As the crowd funneled toward the exit, Ethan remained in place for one last breath of stillness. His face calm, his suit sharp against the courtroom's wood-paneled walls, he finally stepped forward. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. The quote came later, clipped, posted, printed. But those who were there heard it, soft and firm, aimed not at a crowd, but into the future. Justice doesn't roar, it resonates. The broken luggage handle hung motionless on Ethan Calder's office wall, catching the last ray of evening sunlight as it filtered through the slats. But in Ethan's memory, it still moved, arcing through the stale air of the airplane cabin, cracking into his son's skull with a sickening thud that never truly faded. That moment, violent, sharp, irreversible, had not dulled. It had simply transformed. Outside the window, the training center buzzed with life. The new recruits, mostly young men in crisp uniforms, filed into lecture rooms marked with bold placards, Ethics in Action, Conflict Prevention, 47 CE, Case Study, Noah Calder. The last bore a QR code and a plaque with a solemn reminder. Every mishandled moment has a cost. Learn the cost. Ethan stood behind the tinted glass, unseen. He preferred it that way. The interior of the training center gleamed with reform. Posters of diverse employees filled the walls, and screens played dramatized reenactments of the incident that had changed everything. The curriculum, newly approved across 3 federal departments, had been born of blood and betrayal. Every trainee in transportation services, from baggage staff to upper-tier security analysts, would now study the signs of escalating aggression and the consequences of ignoring them. Behind the design of this system was ArcLight Integrity Systems, Ethan's own creation, his answer to the culture of silence that nearly destroyed his son. What began as a consultancy had evolved into a national force. No longer just reacting to incidents, ArcLight preempted them, through policy, auditing, and education. Inside the central conference room, Jonah stood at the head of a long table, sleeves rolled, eyes scanning a digital compliance ledger. "Third quarter audits in. No incidents above Class 2 severity," he said. "That's a first for TriStar Aviation." Across from him, Marcus tapped a stylus against his tablet. "Security still needs help with reporting mechanisms," Marcus added, "but they're listening now." "That's more than we had last year," Ethan entered quietly, nodding to both men before glancing at the large screen behind them. It displayed a checklist titled Compliance Milestones Achieved, ArcLight 2026 Target. He marked the last box himself. The room fell into a quiet, satisfied hum. They didn't cheer. That wasn't their way. Their victories were quiet and permanent, like steel beams hidden inside a building. Later that afternoon, Ethan walked the corridors of the rehabilitation wing adjacent to the training hub. The lighting here was softer, the atmosphere gentler. Along the walls were testimonials from victims who'd found help through ArcLight's recovery outreach. Framed photos of survivors stood beside anonymous quotes. But it was one desk in the far corner that Ethan always visited first. Noah sat there, now 16, hunched over a workstation lined with open tabs, digital forensic software, back-end access logs, and violation flagging algorithms. His scar, once deep and cruel, had faded to a thin line above his temple. He looked up as his father approached, removing his earpiece. "Tracked a false injury report from a transit hub in Sterling," Noah said with a proud, understated grin. "Cross-referenced it with their video timestamp. Their story's falling apart." Ethan smiled faintly, pulling up a nearby chair. "You're good at this." "I've had a good reason to be," Noah replied, the grin dimming into something heavier, something real. They sat in a silence that didn't need filling. Back in his own office, Ethan found himself staring at the handle again. It rested in a recessed display case above a small brass plaque that read, "Recovered from Jetway, 12A, Valeport International." It had been cleaned, preserved, the edges dulled for safety. But Ethan remembered how it once dripped with his son's blood, not as a vision of vengeance, but as a weight he carried. A reason, a mark on time. Visitors often asked why he kept it in plain view. They expected sentiment, or maybe shock value. But whenever anyone asked, Ethan would walk to the case, rest his hand gently on the glass, and answer with the same steady words, voice low, unshaken. "Because it reminds me that justice isn't born from anger, it's forged from what survives after." And as the amber light from the window bathed the room, he whispered once more the words he had promised himself on the night it all began. "He used a handle to break my son's head. I used it to rebuild the world around him." He thought he could walk away from his cruelty seconds later. The same handle shattered his jaw. If you stand for dignity, justice, and accountability, subscribe now. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights themes of racism, arrogance, and the swift consequences of cruelty and prejudice. Its purpose is to raise awareness, provoke reflection, and inspire empathy, justice, and accountability in the face of discrimination.